Hey everyone, welcome back to the Lookout. Today is the 21st of September, and back home, just had a kind of 3-day rampage down to the Central Coast, and we got some mapping work down there on a pretty cool property. We're looking at the fire hazard, but we're also helping the community services district down there build a mapping system to help kind of manage their community. So that's one of the things that we do. What I do when I'm not looking out, help run a company called Deer Creek Resources. Anyway, so sorry, I felt bad being away, but I was kind of in a place without cell service and without time to do this stuff. But I got up this morning and caught up and drove like a mother back from Santa Cruz this morning. And man, I'm glad I don't have to do that every day because it's freaking crazy out there. Anyway, I'm home, back in the Lookout. Feels good. So thanks for your messages. And we're going to talk a bit about the current weather situation in California, upcoming weather. We're going to talk about the Anvil Fire, which has been pretty active. A few days that we haven't been covering it. And also about the fires on the Klamath and the Six Rivers National Forests. All right, so we're going to jump straight into weather, current conditions. So I saw a lot of notices on Twitter and social media just about a current red flag warning for high fire hazard here in Northern California, a lot of the central part of Northern California and the North Bay. So last night I was checking out the weather and the conditions ahead of that, and red flag warnings are kind of, it's interesting how they get put together. The weather folks aren't always in the best coordination, I think, with the fire folks. And there's certain criteria that if we meet them, they'll go ahead and fly a red flag warning. And sometimes that doesn't mean that we're in critical conditions. It's always, when anytime it's dry out and we have high winds forecast, it's great to warn people to be super careful with fire and avoid doing things that could start a fire. But not all red flag warnings are created equal. For example, a red flag warning that comes at the end of a 10-year drought following a month of super dry weather is different than a red flag warning that comes in a wet year after a month of really subdued fire weather. So I looked at the humidities last night in the North Bay at about 10 p.m., and the red flag warning was supposed to start at 11 and go through 5 tonight. And the humidities were like 70 to 80%, and the temperatures were 50%. And when the grass, when it's that humid out, the grass really doesn't burn very well. And embers that fly from a fire don't start new fires. So today it's dried out quite a bit. It's still windy out there. It's not crazy windy. I just drove up the valley from the Bay Area up to Chico, and I wasn't getting blown around. I stopped in the valley, and it wasn't too bad. So I just wanted to look at current conditions right now in the North Bay, which is one of the areas that was worried about this red flag warning. It's kind of warmish, but not crazy. It's ranging from 59 to just under 80 degrees, and the humidities there have come down quite a bit from last night, but they're still, in Santa Rosa, the humidity right now is 60%. That's, even if the wind's blowing and you have 60% humidity, that's not critical fire weather. Over kind of on the east side, kind of by Lake Berryessa, it is quite dry. It's 21% humidity and 78. So, that's actually a prescribed burning prescription, if you're burning grass. Maybe not with the winds we're having, but the winds right now, we're seeing 6, 7, 13. So it's windy out there. If you had a fire, it wouldn't be a great situation, but we're not in, Tubbs fire, campfire, car fire type conditions. One of the things that drives that is just what we call antecedent conditions. Oftentimes the red flag warning, we get the peak winds at the end of a week of drying winds. We just haven't had that. So, the humidity recoveries overnight here in, say, Canocti, which is Clear Lake, they've been coming up into like the 70s and 80s every night, 80% humidity. That's damp. That means that you go out in the morning and your feet get wet on the grass. So right now in Konocti, fuel moisture is 7. That's kind of the bottom end of what we like to use with a prescribed burn. So it's definitely not a critical level. Humidity right now is 22, which is quite dry. Air temperature 77. But they're just now kind of getting there. You know, like you look at this morning, fuel moisture was higher, 7.7. RH was 25. Anyway, this is just to kind of say that just because you hear the words red flag warning, yes, you should be careful, but it's good to learn a little more about what's behind them declaring that. And we can't live in a constant state of fear. So just to give you a little context. So kind of in the bigger picture, we've got this low circulating over kind of eastern Oregon. And we've got northeast flow on, so you can see that on the fires here in northeastern California. And that offshore wind is kind of what's been pushing the smoke from these fires out and then down the coast and smoking out the Bay Area. So yesterday I woke up in Monterey and it was smoky. It was pretty bad air quality. That's that offshore wind blowing this offshore and north winds, finally bringing smoke from these Northern California fires down to the Bay Area. Just a little closer up view. You know, earlier in these fires, we saw smoke kind of hanging in the canyons for most of the day. Right now, that mixing from the higher winds is scouring the smoke out earlier, and so we have a longer burning period on these fires. But these fires still don't have a lot of the topographic alignment that they need to really make big runs. And it's just the burning conditions are still not critical. You can see that offshore flow affecting the Anvil Fire. Fortunately, on the Anvil Fire, some of the areas that are kind of most at risk are kind of tucked in the canyons on the south side of the fire. So speaking of Anvil, we're going to jump into Anvil in detail now and look at the satellite imagery from 2 days ago. You know, I think it's helpful for people to visualize that a fire moves as kind of a band of active flame, and then that behind it, that goes out pretty quickly. So these images give you a decent idea that, you know, not the whole entire perimeter is not on fire at once. And also what's kind of comforting, I think, about this image is you just don't see really any active heat along the Elk River Road for a good portion of this. So a good portion of this southern flank of the fire is not showing much heat and has been cool for several days. So these red spots are where the fire is active. You can see that it's actively pushing to the east. And we've talked about how that can happen even with a strong east wind. The fire can still march back into the east if it's got slope and fuels. So Anvil, Anvil hasn't, I think, been going quite as well as they might have hoped it would. The fire lines on this map are 4 or 5 days old, so we'll look at the ops map for more detail on Anvil. But so as we said in the recent mapping, so this infrared is from last night. Yellow areas are areas that are cooling down. The red are the most active, and the white line is where the fire was night before last. So we're just going to come in here by the hatchery and look up to the north towards Grassy Knob. So what we noticed from the operations maps about 4 days ago was that there was hand line up this ridge above the hatchery, dozer line coming down from Grassy Knob, and I kind of drew these lines in then from that data. And at that time, they had prepped this road out the Grassy Knob road, and it looked like the plan was to fire this ridge and to come down here. And I think that they were still hoping at that point to hold it on this Grassy Knob road, but they were not able to do that. And so the good news is that the firing on the hatchery hand line has held. The bad news is that the fire has kind of outflanked this line. And so what we thought might happen would be that they would hold it here on this corner and be able to fire out this ridge. And that the fire perimeter that we would end up with would kind of be this box coming back to Grassy Knob and then down here. So the fact that it's kind of well established out past their line here, it just basically means that I'm thinking I don't have any intel from this fire as far as what's on the ground happening or context there. But I'm guessing that they're working on another line down this ridge and that they'll try to keep it north of that. We can't tell from the mapping we have right now if that's happening or if it's just going to end up backing down to here and they'll fight it at the river like they have everywhere else. As we said earlier, we expected that the fire will burn out to the edge of the wilderness eventually. The only thing that would probably have to stop that from happening is if we get these heavy rains and you just kind of put the fire out. So they have a lot of resources right now focused on structure protection along the south flank of the fire. There was a place where the fire got across the river yesterday, and it sounded like from this morning's report on InstaWeb that they have wrapped that spot. I don't know exactly which one they're talking about. There was another spot across the road over here also. So last night's infrared was showing 2 different places that the fire was across. And it showed that this white spot here was where it had crossed the night before last. So this is where that was as of last night, I don't know, about 10 o'clock. So you can see on this end from where the white line is, we're on the southeast corner of the fire, that the fire has continued to kind of spread over that 24-hour period back down towards the river. And it hasn't, past these spots here, it hasn't crossed the Elk River. Moving out to the east, out of the grassy knob wilderness. And then also, they had a little bit of dozer line here, but yeah, it's pushed over that. It looks like there's fire line out here on the ridge. It's not showing on the ops maps, but on this northeast corner, it looks like there's fire line that has been fired to keep the fire out of this private timberland. So beyond that, I don't know what their plan is as far as if they think they can, if they've got line that's going to hook down ahead of the fire here or not. Not really appraised, and I didn't see that on their operations map. Other news there is just that they've fired off the dozer line on this north flank of the fire, and so far the fire has not crossed onto the private land on the north as of last night's IR. These lines here are just kind of approximations that I digitized in off the ops map. So just to review what we just did on the ops map, here's the hatchery, here's the hand line coming up the hill where it shows it holding. Here's the dozer line that did not hold and the road line that did not hold. Oftentimes you look at a fire map and you see a lot of line inside the fire, and I think it's always good to ask, that usually represents failure, right? And I think it's always good for us to ask why that didn't hold. And not to assign blame, but just to, sometimes we see dozer line inside of a fire that was just kind of poorly conceived. I wouldn't say that here because this is the only ridge they had to work with. But on some big fires like the Dixie Fire, we see a lot of interior dozer line after the fire. And sometimes that's just because you had a whole bunch of people on dozers with minimum supervision that just went and pushed dozer line anywhere they could. There's kind of an adage in the hotshot world that unless you can fire your dozer line before the fire gets there and then snag it and have resources to hold it, it's probably not going to hold. So with the winds we've been having and everything else, this is just a squirrely spot on the landscape to try to hold when you've got fire below your ridge here that can send runs up at you in heavy fuels. So as we said, likely there's hand line being cut down this ridge, but we don't really have intel on that. It's not showing on last night's ops map. Going around the north side of the fire, the ops map isn't showing some of these lines as being done yet, but as I've mentioned before, oftentimes getting intel back to the mapping folks is a lower priority for folks than actually just cutting the line and getting it in. So, you always have to take what's shown on the ops map as a grain of salt. This northern division doesn't have a ton of resources on it, but you can see completed dozer line out this ridge. And like we said, we expect this to be the final perimeter of the fire, that it'll burn until it gets out to where it can be fought. Back over to this northeast corner, this is the ridge where we talked about potentially that we think there's probably dozer line that they're firing out this ridge right now. And that's why the fire's cooling down on that edge. And that we don't really know what the plan is going out this ridge here. Some more interior dozer line here that the fire burned right across. And we kind of thought that'd probably happen just because, if you have a dozer line that just comes out and ends somewhere, it's good odds that the fire will just burn around the end of it and keep going. And also, if you don't have a plan to fire it, like we said. Oftentimes you got a bunch of dozers sitting. No one wants dozers just to sit, so you'll go push whatever you can and hope that maybe the fire lays down, and you can use what you pushed. But a lot of that happens. A lot of times, every ridge that is pushable gets pushed during a fire, whether or not it is part of a tactical plan. So coming back down around the bottom here, we've got the spot fires here are mapped, and we see that they have been prepping this road system south of the fire, south of Elk River Road. Some of it's shown as done, some of it's not. There's some proposed dozer line here. That's contingency. You know, the primary strategy here is to hold it on the river and the river road, and to be really aggressive in picking up anything that spots across. So it looks like there's still work going on with contingency on the south side of the river, but their primary resource commitment right now has been structural protection and keeping the fire from crossing the road. All right. That's about all I have on Anvil. So just jumping out to look at the big picture, like we said, on fires like this, fires burning in the timber do what they want with the weather, and we put them out when they come out to a place that we have a tactical foothold, or when it rains. But these segments out here burning to the east, those are going to burn until it rains. There's not really any plan right now or anything showing on the map here to keep these fires from moving to the east. There's not a lot of homes or other assets beyond this timberland up here that are threatened by the fire moving this direction. And fighting fire in this country is nigh impossible if the weather isn't cooperating. All right, that's Anvil. And here's a little progression map from the team of the Anvil Fire, showing just spread by day. You can see the red is the 20th. So there's been significant spread on this fire out just in general. But you can also see that we've had no real spread, very little spread on the Elk River corridor over the past few days. Okay, we're going to jump to Northern California. Just a quick check-in here on the Smith River Complex. There really has been very little growth on Smith River Complex, but there has been a little. We got the white line as usual showing new spread. So you see there's no new spread mapped until you come around here by Darlingtonia. And this has been kind of semi-slow motion active for, a month really. So some firing going on here and gaining depth on that firing. But really minor spread here along this west end of the fire. No heat at all really showing along this southern edge that's kind of been fired. And some of this, we don't know if it's been cold trailed or if it just went out on its own. Cold trailing is when you send a crew through and they stir up the edge of the fire that appears to be out, and they mop up any little small embers. But basically it means the fire's out and you're kind of just going along to make sure there's no hot spots that could rekindle if it dries out or gets windy. A little bit of new spread here on the east side of the fire. Basically what we would call kind of a slope-driven run, where you can see that the night before last, this side of the fire squirted out and it was established, and then the wind and terrain helped it make a run here. I don't really have that many local landmarks for this. This is north of the Hurdy-Gurdy fire, kind of south of Idlewild. That's really the only new spread we see outside the perimeter. The north end's all cooling off. A little bit of interior burning right by the state line. All right, so coming down to the Blue 2 fire, the Bluff fire, and the Mosquito fire. These fires are interesting for sure in the way that they're being fought. The Blue Creek fire has been kind of one of the bigger growth fires. So quite a lot of the smoke that's been coming down to the Bay Area has been coming from this fire, and also looked like to me from the Anvil Fire in Oregon. Blue Creek fire has not really been fought much at all, except with indirect attack. And the Marlow basically has pretty much burned what it wanted to and gone out without really any firefighting. Same with large portions of Blue Creek. They're just kind of either run out of slope or skunked around and gone out. And then we've got these active portions where the fire's had either some terrain to run on or fuels that are aligned with kind of slope and weather. So this fire, Blue Creek, grew about 4,000 acres over the last 24 hours. You can see the white line. So we had some pretty significant growth on this fire on the southwest quadrant. Well, here, what we can see here that looks interesting is it looks like there's a bit of tactical firing happening along these road systems, and a lot of the firefighting that's been happening on these roads, on these fires, has been prep work out ahead of the fires along these tactical bridge systems. So it looks like potentially they're hoping to box this fire in with some firing out this ridge. Quite a lot of firing happening on the Bluff Mosquito kind of complex. You can see this is firing operations out to the northeast of the Bluff fire. The plan from the get-go on Mosquito and Bluff has been to kind of try to maximize the amount of good fire, backing fire, and create a kind of regional box to contain the two fires and to kind of tie them in to this other fire. And so they've been proceeding apace with that. And I think what's interesting about that is that a lot of the firing that they're doing, when they've stopped putting fire on the ground, the fire has kind of gone out. So ever since we had rain, which we didn't have a lot of rain on these fires, but we had some rain in the beginning of September, we've had 3 weeks basically of kind of excellent prescribed burning type conditions. And so it's interesting to me that we've had fairly minimal spread outside of places that the firefighters have been helping the fire along. So largely beneficial fire effects on these fires as far as backing fire, low severity, burning up a lot of brush and undergrowth, and not killing most of the overstory. We'll jump back into this fire in a minute to look at the severity. So not a lot of new growth on Mosquito at all. And most of the growth on Bluff is firing operations that are carrying out this ridge. And the idea is basically that we don't want this fire to be able to make a run up and out of here. At some point, it's not going to be able to run up and out of here because it's going to hit the next fire to the north. But in general, they're building a box here with firing off these ridges with the idea that they don't want the fire to become established in here. And then if we have strong southwest winds, down the road, to blow out of here and spread farther down towards the Klamath River where people live. Anyway, I think interesting tactical firing on this. It's a really long-term plan that they've been working on for over a month now. Pearch Fire is active. As we've been following on the Perch here above Orleans. Perch is cold, where they did the defensive firing down this ridge system before the rains. We've had a little new spread here in the last couple of days, but not in the past 36 hours. The fire is still actively spreading down towards Soames Bar, and with these increased winds in here, hearing from some folks up there that these fires, are as active as they have been really on this north flank. So from the get-go, the plan's been to let the fire back down to 96, back down to the Salmon River, and it's doing that. Not a huge amount of spread. We're seeing, maybe 50 to 100 yards downhill in the past 24 hours. The part that's been that we've been focused on quite a bit is, we've got some friends living here at Butler Flat. The fire's been spreading steadily towards them for the past, 3 weeks, and they've been watching it come. Yesterday, it didn't really move at all on the lower slope, but it did move significantly down the ridge, kind of right above Butler. So it's coming. It's coming slow. It's still coming. And the folks who live here have done a huge amount of work over the past decades, getting on good terms with fire. So if there's any place that's ready for a fire to come down, Butler would be one of those. We're not really seeing any heat on, to speak of, or new spread up on the Klamath on the Fish and Malone fires. I think I don't have them on right now, but I don't really have anything to report on those. But I did want to jump in here real quick while we're talking about severity and just look at I'm using this one because it kind of sees through the smoke better than the one we usually use that's green and red. But you can see kind of the active fire areas on the blue, or on the blue 2 fire. And I thought what was interesting down here is you can just see that the firing that they've been doing on Mosquito and Bluff, you can barely see any heat from that. They lit these ridges, they gain depth with drones, and these fires at noon when they fly these 2 days ago, there's just little pockets of heat. These fires are barely burning, and out here they fired a few days ago, and it's just pretty much gone out without, there's little spots here and there. So I think when you hear that there's red flag warnings, if these fires here on the Klamath were burning thousands of acres a day, making huge runs, that would tell you something about the seasonal kind of intensity of wildfire. But the fact that we're not seeing that happening, you should kind of run that through your filter when you see, hey, we got red flag warnings. Should I be afraid? It's like, well, we've had fires on the ground in the Klamath that have been burning for over a month that are like a couple thousand acres in size total. That tells you something about the potential severity of the red flag warning that we're having for other parts of Northern California. We're in kind of a normal or low fire hazard conditions overall for the season. So that's about all I got. Feel free to shoot us questions. And thanks to the folks that have been getting us intel. I got a reply from the Klamath National Forest. We sent the Klamath We sent the Klamath a list of questions we had about some of their management decisions on the Klamath Happy Camp complex, and they got back to us. And so I haven't had a chance to review the answers yet, but we got kind of written answers to our questions from the forest supervisor up there. So we appreciate the work that we know they're busy. So we appreciate the work that the public affairs officer on the Klamath did to make that happen. Appreciate hearing back from the forest supervisor, and we'll be covering that in a broadcast soon. Thanks, everyone. Be sure to check out our website, thelookout.org. My wife's making some really cool Lookout coffee mugs. Good Christmas presents for your Lookout fanatic friends. Hats, T-shirts. If you hang tight, I'm hoping to get back in the shop and make some Lookout axes. Last year we made a bunch of axes and sold them as a Lookout fundraiser, so want to do that again. Just got to kind of balance out the work travel and everything else.